What if you could stand in one place and see nearly 2 billion years of history? Not in a museum or a textbook, but carved into the ground beneath your feet. The Grand Canyon in Arizona, in the western United States, stretches for over 446 kilometers. It drops roughly 1.6 kilometers deep and spans up to 29 kilometers wide. Those numbers are impressive, but they do not explain what makes this place different. The rocks at the very bottom are about 1.75 billion years old. Billion with a B. This single canyon exposes a record of almost 40% of Earth's entire existence. Layer after layer of stone, each one a chapter from a different age. But here is the strange part. About 1.2 billion years of that story are completely missing. Gone without a trace. An entire chapter of the planet's autobiography was torn out. Geologists call it one of the greatest unsolved mysteries in their field. Over the next several minutes, we will walk through this canyon from bottom to rim. We will follow the explorers, the scientists, and the people who have called it sacred. And we will try to understand what 1.2 billion missing years actually means. This is the story the Grand Canyon tells, if you know how to read the stone. Before we go deep into the geology, it helps to understand the sheer scale of this place. The Grand Canyon stretches about 446 kilometers from one end to the other. At its widest point, the distance from one rim to the other is about 29 kilometers. At its narrowest, near a section called Marble Canyon, that gap shrinks to roughly 548 meters. The national park itself covers about 4,926 square kilometers of protected land. That is more than 1.2 million acres. Now here is something that surprises most visitors. Many people assume the Grand Canyon is the deepest canyon on Earth. It is not even close. The Yarlung Sangpo Grand Canyon in Tibet drops more than 5,300 meters. That is over 2 miles deeper than what you see here in Arizona. So why does the Grand Canyon hold such a powerful reputation? The answer is not about depth alone. The deepest point here, measured near the North Rim at Cape Royal, reaches 1,857 meters. From the more popular South Rim, the drop is typically between 1,200 and 1,500 meters. Impressive, but not a world record. What sets this canyon apart is what the walls reveal. Every layer of rock you see tells a story from a completely different era of Earth's past. The reds come from ancient deserts, the grays from shallow seas, and the yellows from old coastal swamps. Each band of color represents millions of years. The canyon is not just deep in space, it is deep in time. Standing at the edge, you are not looking at a hole in the ground. You are looking at a cross-section of nearly 2 billion years of Earth's history. The oldest rocks down there formed before any complex life existed on this planet. It is essentially Earth's autobiography, carved open for anyone willing to look closely. From the birth of continents to the modern era. Every single color, a different chapter. To find the oldest rocks in the Grand Canyon, you have to go all the way down. Past every colorful layer, past every era of ancient life, to the very bottom. There, pressed against the Colorado River, sits a dark and twisted formation. It is called the Vishnu Schist. It formed about 1.75 billion years ago. That is more than a third of Earth's entire lifespan. But the age alone is not the most remarkable part of the story. These rocks did not form at the surface. Billions of years ago, 2 continents collided and created a massive mountain range. The force of that collision drove certain rocks deep underground. How far down? About 19 kilometers beneath the surface. At that depth, temperatures and pressure are so extreme that ordinary rock transforms completely. That transformation has a name in geology: metamorphism. It is the same force that turns soft limestone into marble. The Vishnu Schist is what remains of those ancient buried mountains. Now consider what had to happen next. For those deep rocks to reach the surface, everything above them had to vanish. Roughly 16 to 24 kilometers of mountain and stone eroded away over hundreds of millions of years. Wind, water, and gravity did the work, slowly and without pause. No one was there to see it happen, but the proof is right there in the rock. Today, you can hike to the canyon floor and press your hand against that ancient surface. Your fingers would rest on a piece of earth that predates all complex life. A rock that once sat deeper underground than any mine humans have ever built. It survived the rise and fall of mountain ranges that no longer exist. And now it just sits there beside a river exposed to open sky. Nearly 2 billion years of silence, finally broken by sunlight and air. Most visitors walk past these dark rocks without realizing what they are. But every geologist who comes here reaches down to touch them. Because you do not get many chances to hold something that old in your hands. If the canyon floor is the oldest chapter, then the rim is the most recent one. And reading this book is surprisingly simple. You start at the bottom and look up. Each horizontal band of rock represents a different period of Earth's past. The Vishnu Schist at the bottom takes you back 1.75 billion years. Above it sits a group of rocks known as the Grand Canyon supergroup. These layers formed between roughly 1.25 billion and 730 million years ago. They were not deposited continuously. Shallow seas would advance, leave behind layers of sediment, and then retreat. This cycle repeated over and over again, across hundreds of millions of years. Why did the seas keep coming and going? Because the ancient shoreline of North America shifted back and forth across this region. Every time the sea moved in, it left a new page. Every time it pulled back, it left a gap. Above the supergroup, the layers shift to something more familiar. These are the Paleozoic sedimentary rocks, formed between 525 and 270 million years ago. There is sandstone from ancient beaches, limestone from warm shallow seas, and shale from muddy swamps. Each one a snapshot of a world that looked nothing like today. And finally, at the very top, the rim itself, the Kaibab limestone, about 270 million years old. That is the youngest rock in the canyon walls. The newest page in this stone book was already written 270 million years ago. Nothing younger survived up here, the rest was scraped away by time. What you see from rim to river is not just a canyon. It is a cross-section of Earth's memory, stacked in perfect order. And each color change on that wall marks the boundary between two entirely different worlds. The colors shift from red to orange to gray to white, and each transition spans millions of years. Now, remember that stone book we just described? Someone tore out about 1.2 billion pages. And nobody knows exactly who or how or why. This is the Great Unconformity. It is one of the biggest unsolved puzzles in all of geology. Here's what makes it so strange. At one point in the canyon wall, you can place your hand on a layer of sandstone. That sandstone, called the Tapete sandstone, is about 525 million years old. Now move your hand just a few centimeters lower. The rock beneath it is the Vishnu Schist, about 1.74 billion years old. The two layers sitting directly on top of each other are separated by 1.2 billion years. 1.2 billion years. An entire era of Earth's history that should be there, but is not. No trace, no fragments, no explanation that everyone agrees on. What happened during those missing years? Geologists have debated this question for over a century. Some believe massive glaciers during a period called Snowball Earth scraped the evidence away. During Snowball Earth, nearly the entire planet was covered in ice. The glaciers would have ground down mountains and erased whole layers of rock. Others think tectonic forces lifted and tilted the region, exposing it to prolonged erosion. Over hundreds of millions of years, wind and water removed every trace of what was once there. The debate is still active today. New research papers come out regularly, each proposing a slightly different explanation. But here is what every geologist agrees on: those 1.2 billion years did happen. Rocks were deposited, life may have evolved, continents shifted. And then all of that evidence was erased from this specific location. You can stand in the canyon and literally point to the gap. One hand on 525 million years ago, the other on 1.74 billion years ago. And between your two hands there is nothing. Just a line where 1.2 billion years used to be. It is one of the most haunting things you can witness in any landscape on Earth. After a mystery that heavy, here is a lighter one. Where are the dinosaurs? You would expect a place this old and this famous to be full of dinosaur fossils. There is not a single one. Not one dinosaur bone has ever been found in the Grand Canyon walls. Why not? The answer is a beautiful paradox. The youngest rock in the canyon, the Kaibab limestone at the rim, is about 270 million years old. Dinosaurs first appeared about 230 million years ago, and they went extinct roughly 66 million years ago. That gives dinosaurs a window of about 164 million years on this planet. 164 million years. Yet none of that time is recorded in these canyon walls. Every single layer was already in place before the first dinosaur ever existed. But here is the twist. The canyon itself probably did not exist during the age of dinosaurs either. Most geologists believe the canyon formed after the dinosaurs were already gone. So the rocks are too old and the canyon is too young. Dinosaurs fit neatly into neither timeline. There is no overlap at all. The rocks were deposited long before any dinosaur lived, and the canyon was carved long after the last one disappeared. Of all the stories the Grand Canyon tells, this is the one it cannot. The rocks remember a world that existed before the dinosaurs. Not because the evidence was destroyed, but because it was never here to begin with. Sometimes what a place does not contain tells you just as much as what it does. So if the rocks are billions of years old, how old is the canyon that holds them? You would think that question has a simple answer. It does not, and the debate has lasted over 140 years. One group of scientists believes the canyon is relatively young. According to their research, the Colorado River began carving it about 5 to 6 million years ago. That would make the Grand Canyon younger than many mountain ranges. But another group pushed the timeline much further back. Their studies suggest the western section could be as old as 70 million years. That would be 70 million years, that is before the dinosaurs went extinct. One study says 5 to 6 million years. Another says parts of it could be 70 million years old. How can scientists disagree by 65 million years? Because the canyon may not have formed all at once, the current leading theory suggests something unexpected. There were at least 3 separate ancient canyons in this region, each carved at a different time. One section may have formed 50 to 70 million years ago. Another between 15 and 25 million years ago. And the final sections only 5 to 6 million years ago. Then the Colorado River connected all of them into one continuous canyon. Like 3 separate rivers merging into a single story. So the answer depends entirely on which part of the canyon you are asking about. Some parts may be barely 5 million years old. Others could reach back 70 million years. After 140 years of research, this single question remains open. The canyon keeps its own secrets. Even the scientists who spent their careers here admit they do not have the final answer. And that is part of what makes the Grand Canyon so fascinating. It is a place that still challenges our understanding. The canyon is older than our knowledge of it. Whatever the exact age, one thing is certain. The Colorado River is the author of this canyon. For millions of years, this single river has been cutting downward through solid rock. You would expect the water itself to carve through solid stone. In reality, water alone is surprisingly gentle against rock. The real cutting tools are the sand, gravel, and stones the river carries with it. These particles scrape against the canyon floor like rough sandpaper on every pass. Every flood, every rainstorm pushes more material downstream. And with each pass, the river cuts a little bit deeper. A little deeper, year after year, for millions of years. But erosion alone does not explain the full depth of the canyon. Something else was happening at the same time. The entire Colorado Plateau was rising. Tectonic forces were slowly pushing the land upward while the river kept cutting down. Think of it this way. If you run a saw across a piece of wood, the saw does the cutting. But if someone also pushes the wood up into the blade, the cut goes deeper and faster. That is essentially what happened here. The river was the blade, and the rising plateau was the wood being pushed upward. Over 5 to 6 million years, this combination carved the canyon into its current shape. And the process has never stopped. The Colorado River is still carving, still deepening, still reshaping the walls. The river has never stopped writing. But the river is not only a sculptor of stone, it is also a pathway. For thousands of years, people have followed its course into the canyon and made it their home. And their stories are just as layered as the rock. From here, the geology gives way to something deeply human. Long before any European set foot near this canyon, people were already living inside it. About 12,000 years ago, nomadic hunters began following game trails into the gorge. They left behind stone tools, animal bones, and small shelters carved into the rock. 12,000 years of continuous human presence. Today, 11 federally recognized tribes maintain historical and cultural ties to the Grand Canyon. Among them are the Havasupai, the Hualapai, the Navajo, the Hopi, and the Zuni. For these communities, the canyon is not a tourist destination. It is a living landscape. A place where ancestors emerged, where ceremonies are still performed, where the land itself has a voice. One tribe in particular has a relationship with the canyon unlike any other. The Havasupai, the people of the blue-green water. They have lived inside the canyon itself for over 1,000 years, not on the rim but inside. Their village, called Supai, sits deep within the canyon walls. It has a population of about 208 people. And it is the only place in the United States where mail is still delivered by mule. Not by truck or airplane but by mule. During busy seasons, mules carry roughly 18 tons of mail and supplies each week. That is the only way in or out for heavy loads. There are no roads leading to Supai. The Havasupai chose this location long before roads existed, and they have stayed ever since. But the Havasupai are not the only tribe with deep roots in this canyon. The Hualapai, whose territory includes the western rim, carry their own powerful origin story. According to Hualapai tradition, a comet was about to strike the earth. An eagle swept down and carried the people to safety just before the impact. That eagle later turned to stone. And today, its shape is said to be visible in the rock formation at Eagle Point. A legend written directly into the landscape. For these tribes, the Grand Canyon is not ancient history. It is a living part of their present. Of all the spiritual connections between native peoples and the Grand Canyon, one stands above the rest. The Hopi believe that all of humanity emerged from within the earth at this very canyon. According to Hopi tradition, people once lived in an underground world. When that world became corrupt, the faithful climbed upward through a hollow log. Like a ladder from one world to the next. You might expect a place of emergence to be high on a mountain, closer to the sky. For the Hopi, the path goes downward deep into the earth. The place where they emerged is called the Sipapuni. It is located near the point where the Little Colorado River joins the main canyon. The exact site remains a closely guarded sacred location. Outsiders are not permitted there. For centuries, Hopi men have made pilgrimages to this area as part of their coming-of-age rituals. They travel deep into the canyon to collect salt from the mineral deposits along the river. The journey itself is the ritual. It is not only about gathering salt. It is about retracing ancestral steps and connecting the present to the origin of all people. In every Hopi village, there is a ceremonial structure called a kiva. And in every kiva, there is a small hole in the floor. That hole represents the Sipapuni, the place where humanity first entered this world. A physical reminder, built into the architecture of daily life. But the Sipapuni is not only about beginnings. The Hopi also believe that a powerful spirit called Masa lives within the canyon. Masa is the guardian of death and the keeper of the underworld. In Hopi tradition, certain areas of the canyon serve as gateways to the afterlife. So the same place where life began is also where it ends. Birth and death, both held within the walls of a single canyon. The Grand Canyon is not merely a geological wonder for the Hopi. It is the center of their spiritual universe. A place where the boundaries between worlds are thin enough to cross. Some things in this canyon go beyond the reach of science. They belong to the people who have known this place the longest. And that knowledge deserves the same respect as any geological study. In 1869, a man with one arm decided to navigate a river nobody had ever mapped. His name was John Wesley Powell. 7 years earlier, at the Battle of Shiloh, a bullet struck his right arm. Surgeons amputated the arm 2 days later. Most people would have considered their days of physical adventure to be over. Powell did not even hesitate. On May 24, 1869, he set out from Green River, Wyoming, with 10 men and 4 wooden boats. They carried 10 months of food supplies. Nobody told them what was ahead because nobody knew. The maps of the region were almost entirely blank. Within the first few weeks, the expedition lost one of its 4 boats to the rapids. Critical food supplies were destroyed in the wreck. One man, Frank Goodman, gave up after the first month and left the group. That left 9 men to continue the journey. As the weeks went on, conditions grew worse. The rapids became more violent, the food supply ran low, and the canyon walls rose taller around them. Turning back was no longer an option. Then came the decision that haunts this story. Near a stretch now called Separation Canyon, 3 men chose to leave. Dunn and the 2 Howland brothers, Ormel and Seneca, decided they had had enough. They believed the river ahead would kill them. So they climbed out of the canyon and headed overland. They were never seen again. According to most accounts, all 3 were killed by members of the Shiva Paiute tribe. The exact circumstances remain uncertain to this day. Meanwhile, the remaining 6 men pressed on through the final rapids. Against all expectations, they made it through, 6 out of 10. Powell's expedition became the first documented passage through the Grand Canyon by river. The expedition introduced the canyon to the wider world, permanently. And here is one more number to consider. The number of people who have completed a continuous hike through the entire length of the canyon is smaller than the number of astronauts who have walked on the moon. 12 people have walked on the moon. Powell's expedition showed the world what was inside the canyon. But it took a president to make sure it stayed that way. In the early 1900s, mining companies and developers had their eyes on the Grand Canyon. They saw copper, uranium, and profit buried in those ancient walls. Theodore Roosevelt saw something different. He visited the canyon in 1903 and was so moved that he decided it had to be protected. But Congress refused to act. Powerful business interests lobbied hard against any restrictions on mining or development. So Roosevelt found a way around Congress. 2 years earlier, in 1906, a law called the Antiquities Act had been signed into effect. It was designed to protect small archaeological sites from looting and destruction. Small archaeological sites, not vast landscapes. Roosevelt stretched that law far beyond its original purpose. On January 11, 1908, he declared the Grand Canyon a national monument. He applied a law meant for protecting ruins and artifacts to 800,000 acres of open wilderness. 800,000 acres. It was the most creative use of presidential power for conservation in American history. Critics called it an overreach. Roosevelt called it necessary. And the precedent he set changed everything that followed. Future presidents would use the same legal strategy to protect millions of acres across the country. 11 years later, on February 26, 1919, President Woodrow Wilson took the final step. He signed the Grand Canyon into law as a full national park. That designation officially ended all private development within the park boundaries. The Grand Canyon was no longer just a natural wonder. It was legally protected permanently. But protection came with a cost that few people talk about. And that cost was paid by the people who had lived there the longest. Once the Grand Canyon became a national park, you might assume its role in history was settled. On June 30, 1956, the canyon changed history in a way no one could have predicted. 2 commercial airliners were flying over Arizona that morning. One was TWA Flight 2, the other was United Airlines Flight 718. Both were carrying passengers on routine cross-country trips. At roughly 21,000 feet above the Grand Canyon, the 2 planes collided in midair. 128 people died. Every passenger and crew member on both aircraft, there were no survivors. At the time, it was the deadliest aviation disaster in American history. How did 2 planes collide in open sky, above one of the widest spaces in North America? In the 1950s, there was no centralized system for tracking commercial aircraft over most of the country. Pilots flying above 18,000 feet could essentially choose their own routes. They relied on visual separation, looking out the window to avoid other planes. The system assumed that 2 aircraft would simply not occupy the same space at the same time. On that morning, the assumption failed. The wreckage fell into the canyon itself. Some of the debris remains there to this day, in areas too difficult for full recovery. The public outrage that followed was enormous. This was not a mechanical failure or a weather event. It was a failure of the entire system that was supposed to keep aircraft apart. 2 years later, in 1958, Congress created the Federal Aviation Administration. Modern air traffic control, the system that tracks every commercial flight today, was born from this disaster. One collision over a canyon in Arizona reshaped how the entire world manages air travel. But this time, the canyon did not just inspire wonder. It forced an entire industry to rethink how it protects human lives. Sometimes the most important lessons come from the most unexpected places. And sometimes those lessons are written not in stone, but in tragedy. The canyon witnessed it all, silently, from below. After a story that heavy, the canyon has something lighter waiting inside its walls, something small and pink. You would expect a canyon this dry and rocky to have very little unique wildlife. But deep inside the Grand Canyon lives a rattlesnake found nowhere else on Earth. It is called the Grand Canyon pink rattlesnake. Its scientific name is Crotalus areginus abyssus. What makes it remarkable is its color. The scales are a soft, dusty pink that blends perfectly with the red and orange canyon walls. It is natural camouflage, refined over thousands of generations. The snake is mostly active at night, preferring the cooler areas near the river and its tributaries. Most hikers never see one. But it is there, a living piece of the canyon that evolved to match the stone around it. The canyon hides more than snakes, though. Over 1,000 caves have been recorded within the canyon walls. How many are open to the public? Just one single cave. It is called the Cave of the Domes, located in a formation called Horseshoe Mesa. The rest are either sealed, too dangerous, or kept off-limits for preservation. 1,000 hidden rooms that almost no human will ever enter. And then there is one of the canyon's strangest modern stories. Visitors sometimes take rocks from the canyon as souvenirs. This is illegal, but it happens. What happens next is the unusual part. Many of those visitors later send the rocks back. They mail them to the park rangers, often with long letters of apology. The letters describe strings of bad luck that began after they took the stone home. Rangers receive these packages on a regular basis. Whether the canyon truly has that kind of power is another question entirely. But the fact that so many people feel compelled to return what they took says something. This place stays with you even after you leave. The Grand Canyon's most urgent story is not about rocks or rivers. It is about the people who were told they no longer belonged in their own home. When the canyon became a national park in 1919, the Havasupai were forced to leave. The land they had lived on for over 1,000 years was taken from them. They were relocated to a small reservation deep inside the canyon. Today, the National Park Service uses a phrase that carries deep weight. They recognize the Havasupai as the original owners and the displaced caretakers of the Grand Canyon. Original owners and displaced caretakers. That history alone would be painful enough. But the threat to the Havasupai did not end in 1919. About 6 miles southeast of the canyon sits a uranium mine called Pinyon Plain. The Havasupai have fought against this mine for over 40 years of resistance. Why? Because the mine sits directly above their only source of drinking water. Havasu Creek, the blue-green water that gives the Havasupai their name, flows beneath the mine site. Since 2016, mining operations have reached the underground water table. More than 80 million gallons of groundwater have been pumped out, 80 million gallons of water gone. Tests of that water found elevated levels of uranium, lead, and arsenic. In 2024, the mining company resumed transporting uranium ore from the site. The fight continues to this day. In 2023, President Biden designated nearly 1 million acres surrounding the canyon as a national monument. The name itself tells the story. In Havasupai, Baj Nawavio means the place where indigenous peoples roam. In Hopi, Ida Kukvini means our ancestral footprints. For the first time, the land was officially named in the languages of the people who came first. But even this protection has limits. Under an 1872 mining law, 2 existing mining claims within the monument remain legally valid. The monument protects the land, but not necessarily the water beneath it. The Havasupai remain caught between a presidential declaration and a 150-year-old mining law. Protection and exploitation existing side by side in the same canyon. That tension is the Grand Canyon's most modern chapter, and it is still being written. We started with a question. What if you could stand in one place and see nearly 2 billion years of history? The Grand Canyon is that place. Its rocks remember a time before complex life existed on this planet. The canyon walls hold a mystery where 1.2 billion years simply vanished. Its river has been writing the same story for millions of years without pause. And its people, the ones who were here long before anyone drew a map, still call it sacred. They see what the rocks alone cannot say. That this canyon is not just a record of where the earth has been. It is a reminder of where we stand in the story. A tiny chapter in a book that is still being written. The Colorado River is still carving, the rocks are still weathering. Earth's autobiography in stone is not finished yet.